January 14th, 1945. 35,000 feet above Salzwedel, Germany, Oberleutnant Josef Sepp Keller had been flying fighters since 1940. He'd survived France, Britain, Russia, and now the final defense of the Reich itself. But nothing in 5 years of combat had prepared him for what he witnessed that frigid January morning. Below him, a formation of P-51 Mustangs escorted American bombers toward their targets deep in Germany. The silver fighters moved with casual confidence, owning skies that had once belonged to the Luftwaffe. Keller sat in the cockpit of Germany's answer to the Mustang, the Focke-Wulf Ta-152H, the most advanced propeller fighter Germany would ever produce. Its Junkers Jumo 213E engine, boosted by MW50 methanol water injection, generated 2,050 horsepower. Its pressurized cockpit allowed him to operate at altitudes where American fighters gasped for air. Its 30mm Mk108 cannon and two 20mm MG151 cannons carried enough firepower to destroy any Allied aircraft with a single burst. On paper, the Ta-152 was everything the Mustang was and more. Faster at altitude, better armed, more heavily armored, designed specifically to counter the American fighter that had seized control of German skies. Yet as Keller scanned the horizon, he counted 16 P-51s below him. Across all of Germany that morning, perhaps 30 Ta-152s were operational. The Americans had built over 15,000 Mustangs. Germany had completed fewer than 200 Ta-152s, and most would never see combat. Keller pushed his throttle forward and dove toward a straggling Mustang. His Ta-152 accelerated beautifully, its long wings cutting through the thin air with precision. He had the altitude advantage, the speed advantage, the armament advantage. Everything German engineering could provide. What he didn't have was what mattered most. He didn't have fuel for more than 20 minutes of combat. He didn't have spare parts if anything broke. He didn't have wingmen, because there weren't enough Ta-152s to form proper formations. He didn't have a Luftwaffe that could challenge American air supremacy. And most critically, he didn't have time. The war was already lost. As Keller closed to firing range, the Mustang pilot spotted him. The American aircraft rolled inverted and pulled into a split S, diving away with casual confidence. The pilot knew what Keller knew. One German fighter against 16 Americans wasn't combat. It was suicide. Keller broke off his attack and climbed back toward the safety of altitude, his superior fighter rendered impotent by mathematics. No amount of engineering excellence could overcome. The story of the Ta-152 wasn't about whether Germany could build a fighter superior to the Mustang. They could and did. The story was about why superior technology arrived too late and in numbers too small to matter, and how American industrial capacity had already won the war before Germany's best fighter ever reached the sky. The genesis of the Ta-152 began not as a response to the P-51, but as the logical evolution of Germany's most successful fighter line, the Focke-Wulf FW-190. Designer Kurt Tank had created the FW-190 in 1939 as an alternative to the Messerschmitt Bf-109. When it entered service in 1941, it shocked RAF pilots who had grown accustomed to defeating the 109. The radial engine FW-190 was faster, more heavily armed, and more maneuverable than anything the British could field. But by 1943, the FW-190's dominance was fading. Allied fighters were improving rapidly. More critically, the strategic bombing campaign required German fighters to operate at altitudes where the FW-190's BMW 801 radial engine struggled. At 30,000 feet and above, the engine lost power, performance degraded, and American bombers with their escorts operated with relative impunity. Kurt Tank recognized the problem immediately. Germany needed a high-altitude fighter that could intercept bombers flying at 25,000 to 35,000 feet. The Bf-109G could reach those altitudes, but lacked the armament to destroy heavy bombers efficiently. The FW-190 had the firepower, but couldn't reach the altitude. Tank's solution was elegant. Extend the FW-190's wings for better high-altitude performance, replace the radial engine with an inline Junkers Jumo Ta-152 optimized for altitude, add a pressurized cockpit, and increase fuel capacity for longer endurance. The resulting aircraft, initially designated FW-190D or DORA, entered service in autumn 1944. It was immediately successful, matching or exceeding P-51 performance at most altitudes. But Tank wasn't satisfied. The DORA was a compromise, an FW-190 modified for high altitude. What Germany needed was an aircraft designed from the start for extreme altitude operations, an aircraft that could climb to 40,000 feet, cruise efficiently at 35,000 feet, and destroy American bombers and their escorts in the stratosphere where other fighters struggled. In March 1943, Tank proposed a radical development of the FW-190 with wings extended from 10.5 meters to 14.5 meters, a Junkers Jumo Ta-152 engine with supercharging optimized for extreme altitude, a fully pressurized cockpit with advanced oxygen systems, and armament heavy enough to destroy 4-engine bombers with short bursts. The RLM, Germany's aviation ministry, approved development as the Ta-152. The designation change from FW to Ta honored Kurt Tank himself, recognition of his contributions to German aviation, but the timing was catastrophic. By mid-1943, when the Ta-152 program began, Germany was already losing the war of production. The appearance of the P-51 Mustang over Germany in December 1943 transformed the strategic situation completely. Early in the war, American bombers attacked without fighter escort because no Allied fighter had the range to accompany them deep into Germany. German fighters exploited this weakness ruthlessly, inflicting devastating losses. The October 14, 1943 Schweinfurt raid saw 77 bombers lost from a force of 291. Such losses were unsustainable. The P-51 Mustang changed everything. Mated with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Mustang could escort bombers to Berlin and back. With drop tanks, it could reach any target in the Reich. Its performance matched or exceeded German fighters at all altitudes. Most critically, North American aviation was producing them by the thousands. From December 1943 onward, American bombers no longer flew unescorted. German fighters attempting to intercept bombers now faced Mustangs in numbers that overwhelmed any tactical advantage. German pilots quickly learned to respect the P-51. Major Heinz Baer, an ace with over 200 victories, called it the best Allied fighter of the war. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff stated, "When we saw Mustangs over Berlin, we knew the war was lost." The Mustang's combination of range, performance and numbers created an impossible situation for the Luftwaffe. The TR-152 program, already delayed by Allied bombing and resource shortages, now faced an additional requirement. It didn't just need to intercept bombers at high altitude. It needed to defeat the Mustangs protecting them. Tank's team worked frantically through 1944, but every aspect of Ta-152 development faced obstacles. The Jumo Ta-152 engine existed only in limited numbers, with production repeatedly disrupted by Allied bombing. The MW-50 methanol water injection system required chemicals in short supply. The pressurization system demanded precision manufacturing when German industry was collapsing under bombing and resource shortages. The extended wings required specialized jigs and tooling that competing aircraft programs also needed. Meanwhile, P-51 production at North American Aviation's plants in Inglewood, California and Dallas, Texas exceeded 500 aircraft monthly by mid-1944. Each Mustang cost approximately $50,000 and could be built in under 6,000 man-hours. The Ta-152, with its complex systems and specialized components, required nearly triple the labor hours and used materials Germany increasingly lacked. The first Ta-152H0 pre-production aircraft flew in October 1944. Test pilots were impressed immediately. At altitude, the Ta-152H was the fastest piston engine fighter in service anywhere. With MW-50 boost engaged, it could reach 472 miles per hour at 41,000 feet. Its service ceiling exceeded 49,000 feet, higher than any Allied fighter could operate. The pressurized cockpit meant pilots could function effectively at these altitudes without the exhaustion that plagued non-pressurized aircraft. But the test pilots also discovered problems. The extended wings, while providing excellent high-altitude performance, made the aircraft less maneuverable at lower altitudes where most combat occurred. The Jumo 213E engine was temperamental, requiring careful management and frequent maintenance. The MW-50 system boosted performance dramatically, but could only operate for short periods before overheating. Most critically, the aircraft consumed fuel at rates Germany could no longer sustain. By November 1944, when the first Ta-152s reached operational units, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. Pilot training had collapsed. New pilots entered combat with less than 100 hours flight time, compared to 400 hours for American pilots. Experienced pilots were dead or exhausted. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft across Germany. Production of all aircraft types had fallen due to bombing and resource depletion. Jagdgeschwader 301, based at Salzwedel, received the first operational Ta-152H aircraft in January 1945. The unit's war diary reveals the challenges they faced. Of 12 Ta-152s delivered, only 6 were operational at any time. Engine problems, hydraulic failures, and lack of spare parts kept the others grounded. Pilots transitioning from Bf-109s found the Ta-152 demanding to fly, its long wings and high wing loading requiring careful handling. On January 14, 1945, Oberleutnant Joseph Keller flew one of the few successful Ta-152 combat missions. At 35,000 feet, he intercepted a formation of P-51s and engaged. His after-action report described the encounter. The Ta-152H performed magnificently at altitude. I had speed advantage and could dictate engagement terms. However, the Americans had numbers. For every Mustang I engaged, 3 more positioned for attack. I achieved 1 probable kill but was forced to disengage when fuel ran low. This pattern repeated across the handful of Ta-152 operations. Individual aircraft performed superbly. The strategic situation made individual performance irrelevant. By February 1945, Allied bombers flew over Germany in formations exceeding 1,000 aircraft, escorted by hundreds of fighters. Against such numbers, a few dozen Ta-152s were meaningless. The comparison with the P-51 Mustang reveals why the Ta-152 failed strategically, despite succeeding technically. The P-51D Mustang had a top speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, a service ceiling of 41,900 feet, a range of 1,650 miles with drop tanks, armament of 6.50 caliber machine guns, and a production total exceeding 15,000 aircraft. The Ta-152H achieved 472 miles per hour at 41,000 feet, a service ceiling of 49,200 feet, a range of 1,240 miles, armament of 130mm and two 20mm cannons, and a production total of approximately 150 aircraft. On paper, the Ta-152 was superior. In reality, the P-51 won because numbers mattered more than individual capability. American doctrine accepted that the P-51 wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be perfect when you could build 15,000 of them. German doctrine demanded technical superiority to compensate for numerical inferiority. But by 1945, no amount of technical superiority could overcome the disparity in production. The few Ta-152 pilots who flew combat missions reported encounters that demonstrated both the aircraft's capability and the impossibility of their situation. On April 14, 1945, Oberfeldwebel Willy Reschke engaged 8 P-51s near Magdeburg. His Ta-152H's superior altitude performance allowed him to attack from above. He damaged 2 Mustangs before running low on fuel and disengaging. The Americans absorbed the losses without concern. Reschke landed at a base that had fuel for perhaps 3 more missions. The Ta-152's technical achievements were genuinely impressive. The Jumo 213E engine, with its 2-stage, 3-speed supercharger, maintained power at altitudes where Allied engines lost output. The pressurization system worked reliably, a remarkable achievement given the complexity. The armament, though heavy, could destroy any Allied aircraft with a single burst. German engineers had created exactly what they set out to build, a fighter superior to the P-51 at high altitude. But they built it in 1945, when the war was already lost. They built it in numbers that couldn't affect the strategic balance. They built it with resources Germany no longer had. And they built it to fight a battle that no longer mattered. By spring 1945, Allied air supremacy was so complete that German fighters rarely challenged bomber formations. The few Ta-152s in service spent most of their time grounded by fuel shortages. The irony was profound. Germany had the technical capability to match or exceed American aircraft design. Kurt Tank's team had proven that German engineering could solve any technical problem. What they couldn't solve was the fundamental arithmetic of total war. America produced more aircraft, trained more pilots, refined more fuel, and manufactured more spare parts than Germany could match even in peacetime. Under wartime conditions, with Germany's industry collapsing under sustained bombing, the disparity became insurmountable. The P-51 Mustang succeeded not because it was perfect, but because it was good enough and available in overwhelming numbers. It had sufficient range, sufficient performance, and sufficient armament to accomplish its mission. Most critically, it could be produced rapidly, maintained easily, and operated by pilots with standard training. The TR-152 required specialized pilots, careful maintenance, high-grade fuel, and operational conditions that Germany couldn't provide by 1945. Some historians argue that if the Ta-152 had entered service in 1943, it might have changed the air war's outcome. This counterfactual ignores multiple realities. First, the technical prerequisites for the Ta-152 didn't exist in 1943. The Jumo 213E engine wasn't ready. The pressurization system required development time. The manufacturing techniques needed refinement. Second, even if magically available in 1943, the Ta-152 would have faced the same production constraints that limited all German aircraft. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to produce both enough Ta-152s and enough fuel to operate them effectively. Third, the fundamental strategic situation favored the Allies regardless of fighter quality. Allied bombing disrupted German production continuously. American industrial output exceeded German capacity by factors of 5 or 10 depending on the category. Pilot training in America produced better prepared pilots in larger numbers than Germany could match. No German fighter, however excellent, could overcome these structural advantages. The final months of Ta-152 operations illustrated the tragedy of excellent engineering wasted on a lost cause. Pilots flew missions knowing their aircraft were superior to anything they faced. They also knew it didn't matter. One superior fighter couldn't defeat 10 adequate fighters. One squadron couldn't protect a nation from 1,000-bomber raids. One designer's brilliance couldn't compensate for industrial collapse. Kurt Tank himself recognized this reality. In April 1945, with Soviet forces approaching from the east and American forces from the west, Tank flew a Ta-152 to British-held territory and surrendered. His aircraft, one of the finest fighters ever built, sat on a British airfield while engineers examined it with professional admiration. They acknowledged its technical superiority while understanding its strategic irrelevance. The British test pilots who flew captured Ta-152s filed reports praising its high-altitude performance, noting its demanding handling characteristics, and concluding that it represented German engineering at its peak. They also noted that the war was over before the aircraft could matter. The Ta-152 joined a long list of German wonder weapons that arrived too late and in numbers too small to affect the outcome. The comparison between German and American fighter development philosophies reveals fundamental differences in how the two nations approached warfare. Germany prioritized technical excellence, seeking superior performance through advanced engineering. This produced aircraft like the Ta-152, the Me-262 jet, and the Me-163 rocket plane. Each was technically impressive. None were produced in quantities sufficient to matter strategically. America prioritized production efficiency, seeking adequate performance in overwhelming numbers. This produced aircraft like the P-51, the P-47, and the P-38. None were technically perfect. All were good enough and available in quantities that buried German opposition under sheer volume. The American approach proved decisively superior in total war. The resource requirements for the Ta-152 program illustrated why German wonder weapons failed. Each Ta-152H required 12,000 man-hours to manufacture, specialized tooling that served no other aircraft, high-grade aluminum alloy in extreme shortage, chemicals for MW-50 injection that competing programs also needed, and synthetic fuel that Germany could barely produce. Meanwhile, each P-51D required 6,000 man-hours using standard tooling, common aluminum alloys, available from multiple sources, no exotic chemicals or specialized systems, and could operate on various fuel grades. The efficiency difference meant America could build 2 Mustangs in the time and resources Germany needed for one Ta-152. By March 1945, Ta-152 production had reached approximately 150 aircraft total. Of these, perhaps 50 were fully operational at any given time. They were scattered across Germany at bases that lacked fuel, spare parts, and experienced pilots. They flew occasional missions that damaged or destroyed a handful of Allied aircraft. Their impact on the strategic bombing campaign was exactly 0. In the same period, P-51 production exceeded 15,000 aircraft. American fighter groups in Europe operated hundreds of Mustangs simultaneously. They flew thousands of sorties monthly, losing aircraft to accidents and combat and replacing losses within days, from the constant production stream flowing from American factories. The numbers tell the story better than any narrative. Germany's best fighter, superior in most technical metrics, existed in numbers that couldn't affect the war. America's good fighter, adequate rather than perfect, existed in numbers that guaranteed air supremacy. This fundamental difference determined the war's outcome more surely than any technical specification. The human stories behind the statistics reveal the tragedy of wasted excellence. German pilots who flew the Ta-152 universally praised its capabilities. They also universally acknowledged its futility. Flying a superior aircraft when your air force lacked fuel, when your bases were bombed daily, when replacement pilots had minimal training, and when the enemy owned the sky meant personal frustration added to national defeat. Oberleutnant Josef Keller, who survived the war, reflected in a 1978 interview. The Ta-152 was magnificent. At altitude, nothing could touch it. But what good is a magnificent fighter when you can't fuel it, can't maintain it, and can't find enough pilots to fly it? We were given the best tools possible and sent to fight an impossible war. The aircraft succeeded completely. We failed completely. This sentiment echoed across the handful of Ta-152 pilots. They had been given exactly what they requested, a fighter superior to the P-51. They discovered that superiority without numbers was worthless. American pilots in adequate fighters with unlimited fuel, spare parts, and reinforcements defeated German pilots in superior fighters without resources or support. The TR-152's technical legacy influenced post-war aviation significantly. Allied nations studied captured examples carefully. The high-altitude optimization, pressurization systems, and engine supercharging informed post-war designs. The Soviet Union incorporated Ta-152 concepts into their development programs. Britain examined the aircraft's handling characteristics and wing design. America analyzed the engine installation and armament systems. But the strategic lesson was more important than any technical detail. The lesson was simple. In total war, production capacity matters more than individual platform quality. A nation that can build 10 adequate fighters will defeat a nation that builds one excellent fighter. Industrial capacity, resource access, and manufacturing efficiency determine outcomes more surely than engineering brilliance. This lesson shaped Cold War military planning. The American military-industrial complex, built during World War II, remained geared toward mass production. NATO planning assumed numerical superiority through efficient production. The Soviet Union, learning from German mistakes, prioritized quantity alongside acceptable quality. No major power after 1945 repeated Germany's error of pursuing technical perfection at the expense of production volume. The Ta-152 program consumed resources Germany couldn't spare. The specialized tooling, development time, and manufacturing capacity used for 150 Ta-152S might have produced 300 FW-190DS or 400B F-109GS. These aircraft, while less capable individually, would have provided more combat power through numbers. Germany's pursuit of the perfect fighter prevented production of adequate fighters in useful quantities. This opportunity cost extended beyond the Ta-152. Germany simultaneously developed the Me-262 jet, the Me-163 rocket interceptor, the He-162 Volksjäger, and numerous other advanced projects. Each consumed resources that conventional fighter production needed. The result was a 1945 Luftwaffe equipped with small numbers of excellent aircraft and large numbers of grounded pilots. Meanwhile, America focused its development efforts on incremental improvements to existing designs. The P-51D represented the fourth major variant of the Mustang, each incorporating lessons from combat. The P-47D went through multiple subvariants, each slightly better than the last. This evolutionary approach maintained production while improving capability. The German revolutionary approach, pursuing breakthrough technologies, disrupted production repeatedly and yielded aircraft that entered service too late. The Me-262, potentially war-changing if available in 1942, achieved operational status in 1944, when Germany lacked fuel and pilots. The Ta-152, potentially decisive in 1943, reached squadrons in 1945 when the war was already lost. By April 1945, with Allied forces occupying German territory from east and west, the remaining Ta-152s faced an absurd situation. They were the best piston engine fighters in the world, operating from bases about to be overrun, flown by pilots who knew defeat was days away. Some pilots flew final missions against overwhelming odds, achieving individual victories that meant nothing strategically. Others destroyed their aircraft to prevent capture. A few, like Kurt Tank, flew west and surrendered to British or American forces. The last recorded Ta-152 combat mission occurred on April 20th, 1945. Lieutenant Josef Keller intercepted a Soviet reconnaissance aircraft near Berlin and shot it down. This victory, like all Ta-152 victories, was tactically successful and strategically meaningless. Within 2 weeks, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The final accounting of Ta-152 operations reveals the program's complete strategic failure despite technical success. Approximately 150 aircraft built, roughly 50 operational at any time, perhaps 30 pilots qualified to fly the type, approximately 20 confirmed aerial victories, zero impact on the strategic bombing campaign, and zero effect on the war's outcome. Compare this to P-51 operations in the same period. Over 15,000 aircraft built, thousands operational simultaneously, thousands of pilots qualified, thousands of aerial victories, decisive impact on the bombing campaign, and major contribution to Allied victory. The numbers are incomparable because the strategic situations were incomparable. Germany in 1945 couldn't have won the air war with 1 million Ta-152s. The nation lacked fuel to operate them, pilots to fly them, and industrial capacity to maintain them. The Ta-152's excellence was irrelevant when the infrastructure to support it had collapsed. This reality, more than any technical specification, explains why the aircraft failed strategically. The story of the Ta-152 versus the P-51 Mustang isn't really about aircraft comparison. Both were excellent fighters, designed by brilliant engineers. The story is about industrial capacity, resource management, and strategic planning. America built adequate fighters in overwhelming numbers, supported by unlimited resources and intact infrastructure. Germany built excellent fighters in inadequate numbers, unsupported by collapsing infrastructure and non-existent resources. The lesson transcends World War II aviation. In any conflict between industrial powers, production capacity determines outcomes more surely than technical quality. The side that can build, maintain, and operate more weapons, even if individually inferior, will defeat the side with better weapons in insufficient numbers. This truth, written in the skies over Germany in 1945, remains valid today. Kurt Tank's brilliant engineering created a fighter superior to the P-51 Mustang. History records this achievement while also recording its irrelevance. The Ta-152 entered service too late, in numbers too few, supporting a war effort already defeated. Its technical excellence stands as testament to German engineering. Its strategic failure stands as testament to the decisive importance of industrial capacity in modern warfare. The few Ta-152s that survived the war ended up in museums, studied by engineers, admired by aviation enthusiasts. They represent what Germany could do when engineering excellence had no constraints. They also represent what happens when engineering excellence faces strategic reality. No amount of technical superiority overcomes industrial inferiority in total war. The P-51 Mustang flew combat missions into the 1980s with various air forces. Its design proved adaptable, maintainable, and effective for decades. The Ta-152 flew briefly in 1945, then disappeared from operational service forever. One aircraft changed aviation history, the other became a footnote to Germany's defeat. In the end, Germany didn't fail to copy the P-51 Mustang. They built something better. They simply built it too late, in numbers too few, with resources too scarce, fighting a war already lost. The Ta-152's story isn't about engineering failure. It's about the triumph of industrial capacity over technical excellence, the victory of quantity over quality, and the decisive importance of building adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers rather than perfect weapons in token quantities. The German pilots who flew the Ta-152 knew they had the best fighter in the sky. They also knew it didn't matter. 40 years later, those few survivors spoke of the aircraft with pride and their situation with resignation. They had been given the tools for victory and sent to fight a war that industrial arithmetic had already decided. The Ta-152 was everything Germany promised it would be. It just wasn't enough.